Hey guys, welcome to this third Scooby-Doo 50th anniversary discussion / blog. Like I've mentioned before, these are going to be on the fly, unscripted, unfiltered, if you will. And what I want to talk about here is what's known as the Scrappy-Doo hate, and why the hate has been so immensely talked about, and why does a character like Scrappy get the criticism that he does? Well, I think there's a reason. You see, a lot of folks were happy with the traditional formula of it just being Scooby, Shaggy, Velma, Daphne, and Fred going out, solving mysteries, unmasking the individual behind it, rinse and repeat. They were fine with that. They were happy with that. That formula was a success for day in and day out. From episode 1 of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, to even several reboots, reincarnations, and retcons to this day. But it was in 1978 that apparently they wanted to add Scrappy-Doo to the mix due to the fact that, one, the parental groups of the FCC wanted to bring in more of the younger audience, thus they needed a more younger character they could relate to. But also, in my opinion, the people at Hanna-Barbera at the time saw the success that Scooby-Doo, I guess, had brought or helped bring the ratings, the success, and the popularity that Scooby-Doo had brought in to the Scooby-Doo franchise in the Scooby-Doo show, that they decided, hey, we can top that by bringing in someone that the young kids can relate to. And in my opinion, in ironic coincidence with the FCC or whoever suggested the idea of having a younger character, saw an opportunity to do just that. Basically, the stars aligned perfectly for them to be like, hey, the FCC, these parental groups want us to have a younger character. We want to capitalize on the success and popularity of the Scooby-Doo character. Let's go with it. But here's the problem. Scooby-Doo was popular due to the fact that his personality was of comic relief. It was of comic relief. Well, basically, he had good intentions, but he would always make a mistake here and there. And even though they were hoping that Scrappy would retain that popularity that Scooby-Doo did, or Scooby-Doo had, and for the first part he did, in the long run it backfired. Because basically what became annoying, obviously, in people's eyes, is Scrappy-Doo was the only character that was not really afraid. I mean, true, later on he would show a few moments here and there, but most of the time, he was more like, let me fight this guy. Let me fight him. I'll beat him up. And once I beat him up, we can unmask him. And I will save the day. I'll be the hero kind of deal. That's what got on people's nerves. The fact that Scrappy, when he would say, let me at him, was his way of saying, let me be the hero. Let me save the day kind of deal. Let me steal the spotlight, if you will. And that's part of the reason people would get annoyed with him. He would do his Scrappy traps, which would backfire, all that. And in a sense, like I just mentioned, what would happen later on is they would try to make Scrappy kind of like the straight man, but it would not work, because what they would be noticing, even when they decided to go with the 7-minute shorts for a while, is that Scrappy-Doo was being placed in the spotlight way too soon. I mean, in fact, when they started doing the animated shorts of Scooby, Shaggy, and Scrappy later on in the early 80s, and at the same time introduced a character in Yabba-Doo, what did they do with Scrappy? instead of just focusing on this extension of Scooby's family and Yabba-Doo and his owner, who was a sheriff of a town, they decided to add Scrappy to the mix as well. And that right there is what annoyed a lot of fans, was the fact that Hanna-Barbera, in their eyes, seemed to be phasing out Scooby in favor of Scrappy. But for some reason, even though it wasn't as noticeable yet, later on in the early to mid 80s and even the late 80s, fans started to be vocally annoyed. They started through phone calls and mails, snail mail, if you will, write-ins, if you will. They would basically write in, they would phone call, they would do whatever to basically tell Hanna-Barbera, enough with this character. You're basically making this character annoying to the fact that it seems you're trying to replace Scooby with him, and that's not right. Now, I can't confirm that, but from what I've read, the popularity for Scrappy really went downhill. Thus, the reasoning after 13th goes to Scooby-Doo, and the reasoning after Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf, you never saw Scrappy again. You never saw Scrappy in any media ever again, because it was throughout all that time that basically the show staff would get, well, not the show staff, but Hanna-Barbera and those behind Scooby-Doo at the time would get hit constantly with mail, snail mail, write-ins. They would get phone calls, all from fans of all ages stating that they were getting annoyed with Scrappy. And that basically enough was enough. But I think what really, got people upset about Scrappy the most was with 13th Ghost. In the 13th Ghost of Scooby-Doo, they introduced the character of Flim Flam, which even Tom Ruegger, who is known for his work on Animaniacs and Tiny Toon Adventures, stated he was not a fan of. But again, just like with Scrappy-Doo, apparently, the FCC and parental groups wanted to have a younger character kids can identify with. And just like with Scrappy, Flim Flam became an annoying character. But what really, I believe, in my opinion, tipped fans over the edge, not just with Flim Flam, but with Scrappy mostly with Scrappy, was due to the fact that Scrappy and Flim Flam, according to people like Toon Gwen, aka Y-Boy, the reason most of the 13th Ghosts, or the 12 of the 13 Ghosts, were captured was due to the fact that it was Flim Flam and Scrappy that did most of the capturing. And that right there pretty much put fans' annoyance, not just with the new character and a new character addition of Flim Flam over the edge, but it really put him over the edge with Scrappy. And when it came to direct-to-video movies that were part of the Hanna-Barbera Superstar 10 series, that really annoyed them, because who was the one that mostly came to the conclusion or figured out who could be behind things? Scrappy. And they didn't like it. They did not like it. So it's not hard to understand why fans were annoyed with Scrappy, or started to get annoyed with Scrappy, even as early as only his first few years into existence. Mostly because it's because Hanna-Barbera at that time, or in their eyes, were trying to replace Scooby with Scrappy, or put more emphasis on Scrappy, and they didn't like it. I mean, it finally took, I guess, some people within Hanna-Barbera or working on some of the Scooby series to speak up and say, look, you're taking the spotlight away from Scooby. That's not right. This is why they rebooted, in a sense, Scooby with a pup named Scooby-Doo. And yes, it was part of the traditional, hey, let's take a popular Hanna-Barbera show and take the characters in there and make them young. But guess what? For 4 seasons, it proved to be the right formula. Because even though you de-aged the Mystery Inc. gang, people were happy to see them back in any kind of capacity. And on top of that, you didn't have any Scrappy. I mean, take a look at some of the other Scooby-Doo stuff and material that Scooby and Shaggy came out in. You know, the Arabian Nights. I think, what was it called? Scooby-Doo Arabian Nights? No Scrappy. No Scrappy whatsoever. I mean, heck, even when Cartoon Network would do the bumpers, they would use, the only time you would see Scrappy is when it would basically be just him alone, and it was some kind of environment where basically it was the only indication of, yeah, nobody wants to see you. And later on, in a lot of Scooby-Doo series and movies in the past, 20 years, 15 years, it would be really indicated and emphasized that Scrappy wasn't a very popular character. And nobody liked him because they felt him annoying. In fact, the 2002 movie, where he was the villain at the end, in a flashback basically emphasized how annoying he was. Even to the point that in the story, in the flashback, they dropped him off on the side of the road because he wanted to be the leader. And that right there, that moment in the movie, pretty much when you think about it, and again, this is on the fly, pretty much when you think about it, emphasized everything people thought about Scrappy's character. And that was, he wanted to be, when you take a look at his debut, you take a look at some of the moments throughout all the incarnations, during the original run of Scooby-Doo, people would point out the fact, and finally it was addressed in the movie, in the flashback, that Scrappy basically, whether you like Roger Goodell, or whatever his name was, the director, the writer, basically they pointed out that all Scrappy really wanted was to be in charge of the group, because he always believed that something could be supernatural and he wanted to fight it. That in his mind, if he's the leader should fight the supernatural and beat them and be the hero. And for them to put that part in that flashback of the 2002 Scooby-Doo movie and basically state through that moment where he said, you make me the leader or I'm out of here, and they drop him off on the side of the road and saying, we're done with you, that's basically the movie's way of saying, yeah, that's how the fans feel about him. Now, him being the villain, like I said at the end, some may agree or not agree with it, but it kind of made sense. Because all he wanted was control. He wanted to be in charge. You know, you can't blame people for other people behind the series or behind the movie for giving the fans that moment. Now, like I said, throughout other incarnations, animated and stuff, they would still continue the hate for Scrappy. They had the mystery machine under the control of somebody else, a remote control, if you will, run through a display at a carnival of nothing but Scrappy-Doo plushies. And I think that was in Scooby-Doo and the Goblin King. Then, on top of that, you had Mystery Incorporated, where they went into a museum and they saw these wax figures of past characters, and when Fred and Daphne came up to the Scrappy one, Fred said, we've been promised never to mention it again. It's basic, and I get, some people at that time still appreciated the fact that Warner Brothers and Hanna-Barbera were acknowledging, the disdain people had, the fan base had for Scrappy. But then something happened. From that time, I think that was during the last season, and up till now, some of that disdain started to wear off. It's like, okay, enough's enough, we get it. But here's where the real tipping point came in. as mentioned, the 13th Ghost of Scooby-Doo somewhat got a finale and a conclusion this past month in Scooby-Doo and the Curse of the 13th Ghost. And even though some would say up until the last 10 to 15 minutes it was an okay movie, it was a good movie, the one thing that annoyed a lot of people was the exclusion of Scrappy-Doo. They even had a line in there where Flim Flam mentioned Scrappy, and Velma's like, what's a Scrappy? So, a lot of fans were like, okay, we get it, enough with the hate, we get it. Scrappy-Doo is a very, annoying, distasteful, unpopular character, we get it. But what made fans kind of get a little annoyed with it when it came to this movie was Scrappy-Doo was an integral part. So, to erase him and act like he wasn't part of it did get on people's nerves. But in the long run, with that being the exception, people did enjoy the movie up until the last 15 to 10 minutes. But in the long run, even with a conclusion movie or a movie acting like a conclusion to the series itself, Scrappy-Doo, the controversy and the disdain for a character like Scrappy is always going to be associated. I mean, we know as longtime fans that he's part of the Scooby-Doo franchise. There's no hiding it. There's no hiding it whatsoever. But in the long run, Scooby-Doo, in the long run, even though we know he's part of history, you can go on Boomerang and the Boomerang streaming app and watch all the episodes that involve him, that he was a part of. In the end, the Scrappy-Doo controversy, if not hatred for the character, the hatred for the character is going to be a huge point and a huge legendary mark or asterisk, if you will, in the Scooby-Doo franchise. So, that's all I really want to say, guys. Let me know what you think down below. Comment if you like. I'd love to hear from each and every one of you about that. And that's about it for this third, on-the-fly, unscripted, unfiltered Scooby-Doo 50th anniversary blog and discussion. Let me know what you guys think down below. Comment if you like. Talk to y'all later.